You said you had peace. You sat in the quiet, breathed a little slower, whispered a few verses under your breath. You told yourself you were okay, that God had already healed you, that everything was under control now. But somewhere in the background, your soul was still pacing, still clenching its fists at night, still haunted by a silence that didn't bring comfort, but tension. And that peace you declared to the world? It was never peace. It was just the absence of noise. Some people numb their pain with pills, others with distractions, work, relationships, scrolling endlessly through a screen. But then there are those who numb it with faith. Yes, faith. They wrap their wounds in scripture, hoping that if they cover them with enough verses, they'll stop bleeding. They smile during worship, with tears held back in the corners of their eyes. They call it peace, but their body still trembles when they're alone. They say, "God gave me rest," but their mind hasn't stopped racing in months. This isn't a lack of spirituality. It's something deeper, something more dangerous, because it wears a holy mask. It convinces you that your silence is sacred, that your numbness is maturity, that not feeling anymore is a sign of strength. But let's be honest, when was the last time you truly felt safe in the quiet? When was the last time you didn't have to force yourself to be still, or pretend that your stillness meant healing, when deep down, it just meant suppression? Real peace doesn't feel like avoidance. It feels like presence. It feels like breath returning to your chest, like being fully here, even if what's here still hurts. The fake peace, the anesthetic peace, is clever. It doesn't scream like trauma. It whispers. It says, just don't think about it. Just let it go. Just focus on the good. And the more you listen to those voices, the further you drift from yourself. Think about how you pray. Have your prayers become rehearsals? Are you saying the words you think you're supposed to say, or the ones you need to say? Are you crying out for help, or reciting peace declarations, hoping they'll trick your heart into submission? God never asked you to perform peace. He never said your healing had to be neat or tidy or photogenic. He simply said, come as you are, broken, confused, angry, tired, not feeling spiritual at all. But sometimes we don't come. We stay quiet. We avoid. We say, I'm fine. Because if we admit that we're still hurting, after all the sermons, all the prayers, all the fasting, what does that mean? Does it mean our faith wasn't enough? Does it mean God wasn't listening? No. It means you're human. It means healing takes time. And it means the peace you thought you had might just be a clever form of emotional survival. There's something deeply human about craving stillness. But what if the stillness you've been clinging to is actually suffocating you? What if the real reason you stopped arguing, stopped questioning, stopped feeling isn't because you've evolved spiritually, but because you've lost hope that anything could ever change? Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is break, not in front of a crowd, not in some grand testimony, but privately, in the rawest, most intimate space between you and God, where you say the real stuff, where you stop trying to impress Him with your strength and let Him hold what's actually true. Imagine walking into a doctor's office with a wound so deep it bleeds through your clothes. Now imagine smiling at the doctor and saying, I'm fine. That's what some of us do with God every day. And when we call that peace, we rob ourselves of what peace actually is. Because peace doesn't come from pretending. It comes from presence, from letting your soul speak without shame, from admitting that sometimes the silence isn't peaceful, it's just empty, that sometimes being strong actually looks like falling apart. And if you've ever felt guilty for feeling this way, if you've ever wondered why your heart feels restless, even though your lips keep saying, God is good, you're not broken. You're just waking up. You're beginning to realize that peace isn't the same as numbness, that God doesn't want to sedate you. He wants to set you free. Not free from pain, but free from the fear of feeling it. And when that shift begins, when your soul stops trying to escape and starts learning how to exist, even inside the storm, that's when you start to touch something deeper, something real. Not quiet because it's hiding, but quiet because it's finally safe enough to be still. And maybe for the first time, your stillness isn't silence, it's surrender. You can hide from a lot of things in this life, from conflict, from disappointment, from people who hurt you, But the one thing you can never truly outrun is yourself. And yet, so many try, not by leaving their homes or changing their names, but by disguising their pain in religious language, by burying their emotions beneath layers of holy routine. Because if you can make your faith look strong enough, maybe no one will notice how tired you actually are. Sometimes the most devout-looking people are the ones hurting the most, because they've learned to use spirituality as camouflage, not on purpose, not out of deceit, but because it's what they were taught. That doubt is dangerous. That sadness means a lack of faith. That emotional honesty is weakness. So they pray louder, worship longer, memorize more verses, not out of joy, but out of desperation. Desperation to drown out what they're afraid to face, the loneliness, the grief, the anger that's been labeled unspiritual. But here's a question we don't ask enough. What if your most painful emotions aren't enemies of your faith, but messengers? What if the ache in your chest isn't a flaw in your belief system, but a signal, an invitation to heal? You weren't meant to use God to escape your humanity. You were meant to encounter Him inside it. Let's talk about how this really plays out in people's lives. Picture someone who's just experienced a deep betrayal. Maybe a marriage ended, or a close friend turned their back. The immediate instinct? Pray, fast. Quote Romans 8:28. God works all things for good. Yes, that's true, but it doesn't cancel the grief. It doesn't erase the shock. And if those emotions are shoved aside in the name of trusting God, they don't disappear. They ferment, they twist. They wait in the shadows until they explode as anxiety, depression, spiritual burnout. And here's the irony. The more you run from those feelings using your faith as a shield, the further you actually drift from the real God. Because He's not found in your mask. He's found in your rawness. Take a moment to reflect on this. If your faith can't hold your full emotional truth, then what exactly is it grounded in? True spirituality doesn't ask you to hide your fear. It asks you to bring it closer, to trace it to its roots, to ask it gently, what are you protecting me from? Because fear always serves a purpose. It may not be rational, but it's there to keep you safe until safety turns into prison. Now think of Jesus, not just as a figure of salvation, but as a model of being. He wept, He got angry, He begged for the cup to pass from Him. He didn't hide His emotion, He embodied it. Even in perfect unity with the Father, He didn't deny His humanity. So why do we? Why do we think God wants only the polished, composed version of us? Sometimes people will say, I've given it to God, when in reality, they've just locked it away. They haven't dealt with it. They've spiritualized their avoidance. I'm over it. It doesn't bother me anymore. But their voice shakes when they say it. Their eyes glaze over. Their shoulders are tense. And their soul knows the truth, even if their mouth keeps repeating the lie. This isn't condemnation. This is invitation. You were never expected to carry your wounds while pretending they don't exist. But the church often reinforces this cycle, doesn't it? We celebrate testimonies of deliverance, but rush past the ones still in process. We value the end of the storm more than the storm itself. We cheer for the outcome, but get uncomfortable with the middle. Yet it's in the middle, when nothing makes sense, when emotions rage, when faith feels weak, that the deepest transformation happens. Because it's in those moments you realize you never needed to perform for love. God never said, get yourself together first. He said, come to me, all who are weary. And weariness doesn't always look like crying. Sometimes it looks like smiling while your soul shuts down. Sometimes it sounds like religious words spoken with no feeling behind them. Sometimes it feels like being numb in a room full of worshipers and wondering if anyone else feels it too. Here's something rarely said out loud. Not every silence is sacred. Sometimes silence is a trauma response. Sometimes it's a way of disappearing without leaving the room. But you don't need to disappear to be loved. You don't need to be perfect to be seen. And you don't need to be healed to be held. God isn't impressed by your performance. He's moved by your presence. The moment you allow yourself to sit in the mess, not fix it, not solve it, just be in it with honesty, is the moment you start to build real peace. Not the kind that looks good on the outside, but the kind that anchors you when everything falls apart. And maybe you're not there yet. That's okay. Maybe your prayers still feel rehearsed. Maybe your emotions still scare you. Maybe you still think peace means shutting everything down. But here's the truth. You can't heal what you won't face. And you can't grow while you're pretending not to feel. So start small. Start by being honest with yourself. Ask yourself, is this peace? Or is it just my way of surviving? Because if you're still surviving, there's more for you. There's a life beyond numbness. There's a faith that doesn't require you to hide. And there's a God who's not looking for your strength. He's waiting for your truth. You can't outrun what you refuse to face. And yet, that's exactly what so many of us try to do in the name of faith. Not with malice, not with conscious intent, but with the quiet, well-meaning instinct to survive. We pick up our Bibles, highlight the most comforting verses, repeat them like sacred scripts. We fill our playlists with worship songs, hoping the melody will drown out the ache. We say, God is in control, not because we believe it from a place of wholeness, but because we're terrified of what we'll feel if we admit we don't understand any of it. And somewhere along the way, we learn to use God as a place to hide from ourselves. It doesn't start as deception. It starts as a genuine desire for peace. But when that desire morphs into a compulsion to avoid, we enter dangerous territory, where faith becomes a filter that edits out our humanity. When you hear sermons that only highlight joy and victory, when testimonies skip over the nights of despair and jump straight to breakthrough, you start to believe that your sadness is a liability, that your anger is unspiritual, that your confusion means you're doing something wrong. And so you silence those parts of yourself. You pray them away. You command them to leave in Jesus' name. You wear a smile, even when your heart is breaking. Because somewhere along the line, you were told that faith looks like emotional control. But here's the problem. What you suppress doesn't dissolve. It compounds. It builds pressure in the unseen places, your thoughts, your nervous system, your relationships, until one day it spills out, not as a confession, but as collapse. It might look like burnout or chronic anxiety or spiritual numbness that leaves you staring at the ceiling during prayer, wondering if you're even being heard. You may call it a season of dryness, but what if it's not dryness? What if it's your soul saying, I can't pretend anymore? When you use faith as a tool to escape emotion, you don't get peace. You get detachment. And that detachment feels eerily like strength. You feel less shaken, less vulnerable. You're not crying as much. You're functioning better. But under the surface, you're becoming hollow, disconnected. Not just from your pain, but from joy, from God, from your own voice. Because true connection requires presence. And presence means being fully with what is. Grief, anger, fear, all of it. God never asked you to edit your prayers. He never asked for filtered worship. He never said, come to me, only when your emotions are in order. He said, come to me, all who are weary, not all who are well-behaved. Let that sink in. When you bring only your polished self to God, you're not being spiritual, you're being scared. Scared that your rawness will disappoint him. Scared that your honesty will disqualify you. But your brokenness is not the barrier, it's the bridge. Let's take a moment to consider the psalm. David, the man after God's own heart, didn't filter his pain. He didn't say, I trust you, so I'm fine. He said, why have you forsaken me? How long, Lord? My soul is in anguish. Those weren't signs of a weak faith. They were signs of real relationship. Of trust deep enough to hold tension, of love wide enough to contain contradiction. You were never meant to shrink your emotions to fit someone else's idea of what a believer should be. Your faith is not made fragile by your question. In fact, real faith can't grow without them. Because faith that never wrestled, never matured. So ask the hard questions. Cry when the grief rises. Speak when your heart burns. Feel what you actually feel, not what you're told to feel. There's a difference between spiritual discipline and spiritual denial. Discipline says, even when I'm afraid, I'll trust you. Denial says, if I'm afraid, I must not trust you. One invites God into the process. The other hides from him in the name of reverence. But God doesn't want your performance. He wants your participation. He wants the version of you that trembles, that stumbles, that shows up anyway. That's where transformation happens. Not in the pretending, but in the present. Not in avoiding the fire, but in walking through it with Him. And yes, that walk is slow. It's vulnerable, but it's also where you discover something deeper than safety. You discover that peace isn't a place where pain doesn't exist. It's the place where pain no longer has the power to define you, where grief can visit, but not consume, where doubt can knock, but not unravel your center, where fear can speak, but doesn't get to write the story. And in that space, where nothing is hidden, you begin to realize that the version of peace you once chased was too small, too clean, too afraid of emotion to hold any real healing. But now you know there's more. And that knowing changes everything. You say you're fine, but your body keeps telling a different story. Your chest tightens in the middle of the night for no reason. Your thoughts race when everything around you is quiet. Your shoulders carry tension even after prayer. You keep waking up tired, emotionally, physically, spiritually, no matter how many times you've declared yourself at peace. And that's because the body remembers what the mouth forgets. You can quote scriptures, you can sing songs of joy, you can even convince yourself that you've moved on, but your body doesn't lie. It holds the truth you're not yet ready to speak. That's why some people develop chronic fatigue out of nowhere. Why anxiety creeps in even when life seems stable. Why your stomach clenches every time a certain name is mentioned, or why you get dizzy in rooms that feel too familiar. It's not weakness, it's not lack of faith, it's stored emotion. The nervous system is not spiritual, it's physical, and yet it's deeply affected by your inner world. Every unresolved grief, every suppressed tear, every unspoken fear leaves a mark, not just on your heart, but on your biology. This is why trauma survivors sometimes say, "I feel like I'm going crazy," when in fact, their body is just responding exactly as it should, in a world that never gave them time to heal. When you silence your pain spiritually, it doesn't disappear, it relocates. It buries itself into your breath, your gut, your pulse, and eventually, the body becomes a messenger for a soul that has been ignored. We often treat physical tension with medicine. We treat insomnia with pills. We treat burnout with vacations. But we rarely ask, what is my body trying to say? Because what we call panic might be your body screaming the truth. Your lips are afraid to admit, "I'm not safe. I don't feel seen. I've been holding this in for too long." The danger of spiritual anesthesia is that it teaches you to ignore these messages. It teaches you to rebuke every emotion that doesn't look like peace, to label every discomfort as a lack of faith. So instead of listening to the body, we silence. Instead of honoring what it's trying to express, we shame it. And in doing so, we rob ourselves of the very tool God gave us to alert us when something is off. Let's talk about tears for a moment. Do you know that tears have a different chemical composition depending on their cause? Stress tears are different from joy tears. Your body literally releases cortisol through crying. God designed us to weep as a way to detox, not just emotionally, but biologically. And yet, how often do we suppress our tears in the name of being strong in the Lord? How often do we apologize for crying in church or hold it in during prayer because it feels too much? But that release, those shaking shoulders and breathless sobs, might be the exact doorway to your healing. Your tears are not a betrayal of your faith. They are a testimony that you are still alive, that your heart is still soft, that the Spirit is still moving in places words can't reach. So, what do we do with this? First, we pause, not just externally, internally. We stop forcing ourselves to feel what we're supposed to feel. We begin to notice the cues, the tight jaw, the restless legs, the shallow breathing, and instead of brushing them off, we ask, what's underneath this? Maybe it's an old memory you've never processed. Maybe it's bitterness you thought was gone but just got quieter. Maybe it's grief that never had permission to finish its sentence. This is not self-centeredness. This is soul stewardship. God didn't create you as a spirit only. He placed your spirit in a body, and that body speaks. So stop punishing it for being honest. Start holding space for it. Breathe deeply, not just as a calming technique, but as a sacred practice. Take slow walk, journal without editing, cry without explanation. And yes, pray, but pray with your whole self, not just your theology. but your tremors. Not just your words, but your weary hands and trembling chest. Your body has been carrying your silence for years, and maybe, just maybe, it's time you let it rest. Because when you finally allow your body to speak, you may discover that the peace you've been chasing has been trying to reach you from within. Not as a quick fix, not as a spiritual high, but as a slow, sacred unraveling. And that unraveling, though terrifying, is where real transformation begins. You don't need to pretend anymore. You don't need to keep saying, "It's all in God's hand," when what you really mean is, "I don't know how to hold this anymore." You don't need to force a smile in your small group or quote verses with shaky hands just to prove you're still faithful. Because there is a version of peace that doesn't require performance. And when you taste it, you'll wonder how you ever survived on the artificial version. Real peace doesn't look like perfection. It doesn't sound like perfect silence or feel like total control. It's not the absence of conflict or the disappearance of fear. It's the quiet strength to face the chaos without losing yourself in it. It's being able to say, "This hurts," and still breathe. It's crying and not feeling ashamed. It's sitting in the mess and knowing you're still loved. So many of us grew up equating peace with stillness, with smiling faces, with calm voices, with a holy detachment from pain. But that's not the kind of peace Jesus promised. He said, "My peace I give to you, not as the world gives," which means it must feel different. It must be different because the world's peace is conditional. It depends on the environment, on the outcome, on everyone behaving. But the peace of God, it surpasses understanding. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't rely on good news or the absence of pain. It lives in the middle of your grief and still says, "You're safe here." You may have been taught to avoid negative emotion. To take every thought captive meant shutting them down. To walk by faith meant never expressing doubt. But if your peace requires constant effort to maintain, it's not peace, it's pressure. The real kind doesn't demand that you clean up before entering the room. It meets you where you are. Think of a child coming home after a rough day. They don't walk in and say, "Everything's fine." They drop their backpack, kick off their shoes, and collapse into a parent's arms without needing to explain. That's what true spiritual peace looks like. A space where you can collapse, where you can finally let go, where you don't need to earn comfort, you just receive it. And the first time you experience that, it will break something open in you. You'll realize that the peace you once called maturity was actually just exhaustion, that the stillness you thought was strength was really fear wearing a spiritual robe. And that's okay, because now you see it. And when you see it, you can start to choose something better. Here's the truth. Real peace coexists with pain. We think of peace as an arrival point, as something we get to once all the noise stops. But real peace travels with you. It walks beside your sadness. It doesn't cancel out the tears. It holds them. It doesn't replace your questions. It joins them. This is the kind of peace that lets you worship even while grieving, that allows you to lift your hands with trembling fingers and say, "Even now, you are with me." Not because everything is okay, but because you've stopped needing it to be. You've stopped waiting for the storm to pass to feel grounded. You've stopped waiting for approval, for resolution, for healing to look like a straight line. Instead, you let the Spirit anchor you inside the mess. And what you'll find in that place is not a God who rushes you forward, but a God who kneels with you, who whispers, "I know," who doesn't demand that you move faster, heal sooner, or speak stronger, but who simply stays. The peace of God isn't just a feeling, it's a presence. And when that presence is real in your life, you no longer have to manufacture calm. You become a resting place for your own soul. You stop hiding. You stop escaping. You stop apologizing for being in process. And it changes how you pray. You stop praying to be fixed. You start praying to be found right where you are. You stop asking God to erase your emotions and start inviting Him into them. And slowly, without realizing it, peace becomes less of a goal and more of a posture. It becomes your breath, your rhythm, your truth, because you're not faking it anymore. You're living it. And in that place, something new begins to emerge. Something deeper than just surviving. Something more honest than just coping. something more powerful than pretending to be okay. So now what? What do you do after realizing that what you called peace was just well-packaged avoidance? After admitting that your stillness was actually survival, your silence was actually suppression, and your spirituality had quietly become a sanctuary for your pain to hide instead of heal, you rebuild, not overnight, not all at once, but slowly, intentionally. You start learning the difference between numbing and nurturing, between escaping pain and embracing it with purpose, between wearing peace like a mask and letting it become your second skin. And it begins with one of the most radical things you can do: permission. Permission to feel, permission to not be okay, permission to go deeper instead of getting over it. Because real peace isn't achieved by pushing through, it's received by leaning in. And that kind of peace doesn't come from more effort, it comes from surrender. Let's get practical. How do you stop anesthetizing your soul and start healing it? First, stop spiritualizing your avoidance. Not every moment of stillness is holy. Not every letting go is genuine surrender. Sometimes it's a quiet refusal to deal with the thing that aches. So instead of saying, "God's got it," ask yourself, have I actually brought it to Him? Or have I just labeled it faith to avoid the discomfort of facing it? Second, let your prayers become real conversation. Strip away the polished phrases. Say what's actually true. God, I'm still angry. God, I don't trust this process. God, I'm tired of pretending I'm over it. He can handle your honesty. He's not intimidated by your doubt or your mess. In fact, that's where He meets you most deeply, when you finally stop trying to impress Him. Third, connect to your body. You've lived for so long in your head, trying to reason your way out of pain. But healing is not just mental, it's embodied. Start noticing how stress lives in your body. Start breathing slowly when panic sets in. Place your hand on your heart when it starts to race. Whisper compassion to yourself like you would to a child. You're safe now. I see you. Fourth, surround yourself with voices that don't expect you to perform. We all need people who can hold space for our pain without trying to fix it. Maybe it's a friend. Maybe it's a mentor. Maybe it's a therapist or pastor. Whoever it is, find someone who can sit with you in silence and not fill it with cliches. And when you can't find that person, let God be that for you. Fifth, reframe what healing looks like. It's not linear. It's not pretty. Sometimes, healing looks like waking up and realizing you didn't cry today, but also feeling guilty for not crying. Sometimes it looks like laughing at a joke and then feeling a wave of grief crash in 10 minutes later. That's not regression. That's the body learning how to hold both joy and sorrow at the same time. That's growth. There's a Japanese art form called kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold. Instead of hiding the cracks, it highlights them. The bowl doesn't go back to how it was. It becomes something new, more beautiful, more valuable because of its brokenness. That's you. You were never meant to return to the version of yourself before the pain. You were meant to become someone stronger, softer, more aware, more alive because of what you went through. And real peace? It's not found in pretending the cracks never happened. It's found in filling them with something sacred: honesty, grace, spirit, truth. This kind of peace won't always be loud. It won't always feel like victory, but it will feel like home. It's the kind of peace that lets you walk into any room, even when your heart is still healing, and know that you belong, that you don't have to explain your silence, that you don't have to defend your softness, that you don't have to earn rest. It's your birthright. So the next time you find yourself retreating into that old version of peace, the one that demands perfection, denies emotion, and masks the ache, pause, breathe, ask yourself, am I hiding again, or am I healing? And if you're healing, even if it's messy, you're already on the right path. Keep walking, because the destination is not a place where everything is fixed. It's a place where nothing has to be hidden anymore. And that is where real peace begins.